is going on here? Who is acting so weird?
At 78, with silver strands in her hair and eyes heavy with decades of memories, Sally Fields smiled knowingly at the cameras. The host leaned in with a mischievous grin and asked, "If you had to name the men who once made your pulse race the ones you secretly longed for, do you still remember them?" The audience went silent, waiting. Sally didn't dodge. She tilted her head, her eyes glittering, her smile half shy, half daring. Then she said softly, firmly, "There are seven men who only had to reach out, and I'd have said yes before they finished the question." The room erupted. A secret, buried for decades, was finally about to surface. The first man she named was James Garner, the Hollywood gentleman, the outlaw on screen. But a steady anchor off it, Sally starred with him in Murphy's Romance. On screen, Garner played the kind-hearted, dependable man who treated her like a queen. But behind the cameras, there was a different kind of heat, subtle, dangerous, irresistible. She remembered one rehearsal vividly. Garner's arm slipped casually around her shoulders. The cameras were rolling, but all she could think about was dragging him straight off set and not letting him leave her trailer all night. When Jim looked at me, Sally later confessed, every line disappeared. The only word left in my mouth was yes. Garner never forced chemistry, he lived it. A hand at her back, a smile that lingered just a little too long. A brush of his shoulder, it was enough to set her imagination ablaze. His masculinity wasn't about posing or posturing, it was in his presence. The way the air shifted around him, the way he made everyone else fade. Crew members whispered. Audiences saw the sparks. But Sally knew what never made it to. Screen burned even brighter. Every glance, every near touch felt like an invitation years later, long after marriages and heartbreaks. Sally still grinned wickedly when she spoke of him. If Jim had asked me back then, "God help me," I'd have said yes before he even finished the sentence. That was the power of James Garner, not simply because he was handsome or kind, but because he made America's sweetheart dream of being anything but innocent. And Sally admitted freely she loved every second of it. If James Garner was the steady gentleman, then Burt Reynolds was a storm wild, reckless, and dangerously charming. With his iconic mustache, mischievous eyes, and that teasing half-smile, Burt didn't just enter Sally Fields' life through Smokey and the Bandit in 1977. He pulled her headfirst into a whirlwind. She never forgot, on screen, they were partners in a runaway adventure. Off-screen, the fire burned just as fiercely. Sally once quipped Burt could make brushing his teeth look seductive. And it was true. Every gesture leaning against a car door, a playful wink, a gum-chewing grin, dripped with an ease that made her wonder if she was still acting or simply falling. The most dangerous thing about Burt was that he knew his power. He wielded it like a game, fueling the spark while leaving just enough room for imagination. Between takes, he'd hold her a beat longer, keep eye contact a second more, enough to fluster her, enough to make her wish it would never end. And then there was his laugh, loud, reckless, unapologetic. Not just funny, but magnetic. Sally admitted with a grin, if he ever laughed like that in bed, I don't think I'd have survived the night. Audiences adored their chemistry because it felt real. What they didn't know was how close that fire came to burning brighter than the cameras could handle. Sally didn't deny it. There were days when she forgot where the acting ended, and secretly, she didn't care. Burt Reynolds, the rogue in a cowboy hat, turned America's sweetheart into a woman willing to gamble everything for desire. And that's why, decades later, his smile still made her shiver whenever she remembered if Burt Reynolds was chaos wrapped in charm, Paul Newman was something entirely different, quiet, magnetic, and utterly irresistible. With those legendary blue eyes, Paul didn't need to move a muscle. He only had to look, and the world seemed to fall silent. In Absence of Malice in 1981, Sally sat across from Paul in scenes charged with tension, but for her, the true intensity wasn't scripted. It was in the thundering beat of her own heart whenever she caught his gaze. His look wasn't acting. It was possession, pure and undeniable. Paul had that rare gift of making every woman feel like she was the only one in the room. When he smiled, Sally swore the crew, the cameras, the chaos, all of it vanished. There were moments, she admitted, when I secretly hoped the scene would go wrong so we'd have to do it again, just for another chance to look at him. What made him dangerous wasn't arrogance, it was restraint. He knew the power he held, but carried it lightly, with humor and grace. That very restraint left endless room for imagination. Even a simple question, "How's your lunch?" could send Sally blushing, as if it were a secret only meant for her. Paul Newman was the dream, not from afar, but standing right in front of her. He didn't have to chase. He didn't have to press. He only had to exist, and Sally Field, disciplined, sharp, seasoned, suddenly found herself undone, ready to surrender to the bottomless ocean of his blue eyes. If Paul Newman was stillness and surrender, Robin Williams was a storm wild, unpredictable, and unstoppable. On Mrs. Doubtfire in 1993, Sally Field stood alongside a man who refused to stay in one shape for long. He darted between voices, characters, and jokes so quickly the crew often collapsed with laughter, unable to keep up. But beneath the manic brilliance was something far more disarming: silence. Robin had a way of stopping, suddenly locking eyes, and in that pause, stripping away every defense you had. He could make you laugh until you cried, Sally recalled. And then, with one quiet look, make you feel like your soul had just been exposed. That duality was intoxicating. He wasn't simply joy, he was danger. The danger of wanting to hold lightning in your hands, even knowing it could never be contained. Sally admitted there were moments she caught herself wondering, what if all that chaotic, relentless energy were focused on one person, on her? Audiences adored him as the comic whirlwind in disguise. Sally remembered him as the man whose vitality was so overwhelming it left her breathless, longing. If Robin had ever leaned in, she confessed with a sly smile, I would have let him sweep me away, and I wouldn't have asked when we were coming back. Unlike Robin Williams' wild, explosive, overflowing with noise, Clint Eastwood was the embodiment of dangerous silence. Sally Field never actually shared a set with him, but it didn't matter. When Clint walked into a room, the air shifted. He didn't have to speak. His presence was enough. He carried the stillness of a lone cowboy, eyes etched with 1,000 untold stories. Sally once joked, I never acted with Clint, but if he crooked a finger, I'd have followed him right off set without a script. His allure wasn't in grand gestures. It was in restraint, in letting the silence stretch. in letting desire build in the spaces where words never dared to go. Clint didn't chase. He waited. And that waiting was more seductive than any declaration of passion. Sally recalled watching him at Hollywood gatherings. The slow stride, the faint smile, like he was in on a secret no one else knew. That was his weapon control. Not aggressive, not loud, but absolute. He could make me blush. Sally confessed, without ever laying a hand on me. Clint Eastwood didn't have to seduce. He was seduction itself, carved out of silence. And for Sally Field, that silence was the most dangerous invitation of all. If Clint Eastwood seduced with silence, Dustin Hoffman seduced with fire, restless, consuming, impossible to ignore. He didn't just act, he attacked roles, as if chasing a secret no one else could see. To stand across from him was to stand too close to a blaze. Sally Field once laughed. Sometimes I wanted to slap him. Other times I wanted to see how far he'd go. Because when Dustin fixed his gaze on you, it wasn't just attention, it was invasion. He stripped away your layers, exposing things you didn't know you were hiding. Hoffman's intensity was maddening because it never stopped moving. One moment he was barking about a line, reading. The next, he was disarming you with a laugh or a tender aside that cut through the chaos. That contrast, fury, and tenderness, chaos and charm, was dangerously addictive. You never relax around Dustin. Sally admitted, you brace yourself. And sometimes bracing feels a lot like anticipation. What made him unforgettable wasn't just his brilliance, but the unpredictability of his presence. He pulled you in, tested you, made you resist, and then made you want to surrender in the same breath. If he'd ever looked at me like that offset, Sally confessed, I wouldn't have stood a chance. And truthfully, I wouldn't have wanted one. If Burt Reynolds was wild temptation, Robin Williams a storm of joy, and Dustin Hoffman a burning obsession, then Gregory Peck was something else entirely. A mountain of gravity and grace. He didn't chase. He didn't seduce. He simply existed, and the world came to him. Sally Field once admitted, Gregory didn't have to pursue women. We gave ourselves willingly. His presence carried dignity so powerful it became sensual. His deep voice rolled like scripture. Every word heavy with conviction. Even a glance across a crowded room felt like a vow. Watching To Kill a Mockingbird. Sally confessed she wasn't just moved by Atticus Finch. She was undone by Gregory himself. The sharp jawline, the noble bearing, the kindness flickering beneath sternness. If he had held my hand at dinner, she laughed, I'd have needed a week to recover. Gregory Peck wasn't chaos or fleeting fire. He was surrender quiet, total, absolute. That was his danger. He didn't need to promise passion. His stillness whispered, it louder than words ever could. He never had to chase. Sally concluded with a sly smile. All he had to do was exist, and that was more than enough. 7 names: James Garner, Burt Reynolds, Paul Newman, Robin Williams, Clint Eastwood, Dustin Hoffman, and Gregory Peck. Each left an indelible mark on Sally Field's heart. They weren't her lovers. They weren't even all her friends. But they were the men who stirred her imagination, awakened her desire, and reminded her that even America's sweetheart longed to surrender. If only for a night. Sally admitted, I don't regret it. Desire is its own kind of life. It means I've felt, I dreamed, I dared to imagine. At 78, she laughs as she names them, not with shame, but with pride. Because the truth is, longing keeps us alive. Her story is not just about men, it's about the courage to confess that no matter how many years pass, we remain human, vulnerable, passionate, and capable of wanting. And so Sally ends her tale not in whispers, but with a smile. Yes, I wanted them, every last one, and no, I'm not sorry.